and welcome to the session on doping in handball. Although doping is known to be a bad thing to do, and we don't need to talk much about why shouldn't we have doping in sport, it's a fact, it's a reality. I come from the Anti-Doping Lab Qatar, and our slogan is always be pure and stay pure. It's a big aim, big hope, and we'd like to be away from it. Handball has not been known to be a sport of doping. I don't know why. There are so many reasons, and we have experts to tell us about that. Dr. Yorck Schumacher will be telling us about is there doping in handball? And we'll find out if there is and if there isn't, and why not. A little bit about Olaf. Olaf was trained in Germany and in South Africa in internal medicine. He specialized in internal medicine and sports medicine. He's been the team doctor for the Olympic team of Germany since 2000, Olaf. And he's now in Aspetar. His main interests currently are hematology parameters, and he's into research in hematology. And I know he's one of the few experts in IBP, athlete biological passports in blood. So Olaf, the floor is yours, and please let us know what's happening in handball.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alsayrafi. It's a pleasure for me, and I'm actually quite happy that we have some audience today, because doping is usually a little bit the dirty topic that nobody really wants to be part of, you know. So welcome here to the session. I'm going to talk a little bit about whether or not we have a problem of doping in handball, because as Dr. Mohammed says, it's not so obvious. This is never in the press. Nobody ever thinks that there will be doping in handball. For a long time, this was also the case in cycling. You know, Lance Armstrong, he printed, I won 7 times the Tour de France, but we don't have a problem. Obviously, all the scandals showed that that was not true. And if you think that this cycling, you know, so they're different anyways, it's a cultural thing, think twice, because also in other sports where you had similar thoughts, the awakening came late. Just late, you know, this is Pamela Jepto, you know, this is the best Kenyan distance runner. She won the Boston Marathon, she won the New York Marathon, everything, and everybody said, yeah, for sure, the Kenyans, they're born at altitude, they run to school every day. This is why they're strong, and this is why they're not doping, and this is why. So it's a bit easy to say that, in handball there's no doping. For sure not, because other sports have been there, and they have made the wrong conclusions, and they're now paying the price, especially the Track and Field Federation, as you have probably heard through the media. Now, handball, doping, yes, no, what do you think? We have some people from IHF here. I know Dr. Benito and some other people in the crowd. What do you think, conceptually, in handball? Is there doping, yes or no? So there's a clear no. Okay, other opinions? Okay, so no opinions. So there's basically 2-0 for no doping. No evidence of doping. Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay, so no doping that we know of. All right. So let's look at it a bit systematically, and I'm going to go a little bit into the topic of prevalence. I'm going to do try to do a risk assessment for you, you know, about doping in handball. Going to maybe offer you a strategy if somebody from IHF is here. You know, I'm happy to share that strategy against doping for handball. And we're also going to do a little concern about health. We're just going to raise a little bit concern about health. Now, if we go by the numbers, you know, we could stop the talk here. This is the official 2013 anti-doping test figures from WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency. You know, all the sports, this is the super long list, all the sports are cited here, you know, and you will find handball here, down here, you know, so there's handball and beach handball, and you will see has been 3,231 samples, 0.5% have been positive. And you can say, all right, 0.5% positives, no doping. Sure, good numbers. And I would agree with you, Dr. Benito, that this is maybe proof of it, or you might think it's proof. Now, look twice. if you look here, cycling, the dirtiest sport ever, I must say, I can say it because cycling is my sport, so I can take the blame for it. 1.2% of doping. Do you think these numbers are correct? Or do they represent the real amount of doping that is in a sport? Clearly it shows that they do not. Then, how many participants do you have in handball worldwide? I think 19 million, correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is what I saw in a talk this morning, so this is the 166 federations of handball with I don't know how many license holders. And then you have 90 million players, and you have 3,231 samples. Now, predicting the prevalence of doping with this amount of samples is a little bit like angling on the weekend on the Pearl and predicting the amount of fish there are in the ocean. So I think we cannot rely on these figures, that's for sure. Of course, there's not much of an indication here, but we don't know. So these figures don't help us any further. Of the cases that are positive, the very few cases that are positive, the 0.5% cases that are positive, 80% are either cannabis, and we're going to hear a little bit more about it from my colleague who's going to do the next talk, or tainted supplements. So you could say, okay, fine, 80%, that's it. We could stop the talk here as well. We're good. It's recreational drugs or some mistakes. But there's also cases of anabolic steroids and stimulants. This is Mats Lund, I think, from Denmark. He was caught for anabolic steroids. So there is some doping in handball. Is it relevant? Are many people doing it? We don't know. But it does exist. Now, other people are going to argue, handball is such a complex sport, and you've seen this slide before. This is the slide that kind of determines team handball performance and all the qualities from basically the physical qualities to a little bit the cognition, the conceptual thoughts, things around the player that contribute to handball performance, to contribute to a successful team. And you will say, okay, this is quite a lot. This is so multifactorial. There's no way this can be influenced by doping. Now, this is just one way of looking at it. If you now look at the factors, if you do kind of a model analysis and determine the factors that make a team successful compared to other teams. This has also been done, in publications. The factors that make a team successful are player size, throwing speed, the ability to perform in second half, and the avoidance of injuries. So if you have these factors in your team, you'll be more successful than another team who doesn't have these factors. And now, if you look a bit closer, many of these factors can actually be influenced by doping. So some of your, let's say, speak in business terms, key performance indicators, you can actually modify them and maybe make your team more successful. If we now venture a little bit on the dark side, so we think a little bit that we now, of course we would never do that, would dope our team. What substances would we use and what qualities would that influence? Thinking of these, and thinking of our multifactorial model, we can see that with a little bit of doping, if we would be from the dark side, we could actually influence quite a few of these qualities that we have that will determine our handball performance. All the ones mentioned here in yellow. And you can see that overall it's probably 1/3 of the qualities that are required by for handball, it can be influenced. There's a couple of substances that would actually make sense in doping, and this brings us a little bit to the risk assessment. Of course, some substances, the substances are mainly used in cycling or in running, they're probably not so useful for the handball player. So in terms of risk assessment, those substances are probably not worth testing for. Whereas these substances, anabolic substances or stimulants, they influence all these qualities that we have seen are maybe performance determining in handball, make your player bigger, stronger, faster, more resistant to injuries, and more alert during game, which will make him more performant. Now, just to remind you, anabolic substances, you all know those are derivatives from testosterone. They increase protein synthesis, inhibit protein breakdown, so make the player a bit bigger, increase muscle cell differentiation, as you can see here, and increase fat-free body mass. So these are definitely substances that are interesting for handball players. And we've seen the Mats Lund case, he was positive for one of these substances. Stimulants, Those are the ones that influence a little bit the cognition. Interestingly, they were invented during the Second World War, parallel from the Germans and the Americans. They used the same substance, and the substance they used at that time is what is today known as crystal meth, so that's methamphetamine, so it's exactly the same substance. And they are derivatives of neurotransmitters, and they're agonists on the receptors in the brain, and they will delay fatigue and increase alertness. So also something very positive for handball players. So thinking of a test strategy for handball with these physical demands of the game in mind, we first need to a little bit think again of the prevalence, because I told you, okay, if the prevalence is low, then it's not worth testing, but we don't really know what the prevalence is, how many doping cases we have. So we can find out, and we can find out by two means, and this has not been done yet. So we can use, obviously, some questionnaires. Obviously, we're not going to give questionnaires to the athletes and ask them, did you dope or not, or did you ever use doping or not, because the athlete will, for sure, he will lie. So we should use something called the randomized response technique. Does anybody knows what it is? Randomized response technique? No? So that's a questionnaire technique that allows you to get objective answers to sensitive questions by linking the sensitive question to a non-sensitive question. So for example, it's a bit complicated. I'm not going to go into details. You will ask a person a sensitive question, say, did you dope or not? And link it to an unsensitive question. So for example, flip a coin, and if it's a toss, you will answer the question correctly. If not, you'll answer yes to the question anyways. And you will not show the interviewer what the results of the coin was, right? So, and that will allow through statistical means to calculate the likelihood of the answer. Here it has been done. Have you ever used doping substances? The unrelated question is your mother's birthday in the first 10 days of her birth month. So if the athlete answers this question yes, then he should answer that question correctly. If the real answer to that question is no, then he can lie. And based on the probabilities for each, the researcher can work out what the likelihood for this is. And you can see that in most sports, this is across all sports, has been done, the likelihood, the 95% confidence interval was somewhere between 8 and 17%. So that's one way to find out the prevalence. It has not been done in handball. It has been done in many different sports, but handball has never been done. The next possibility is to look at biological markers. So obviously we know that doping will influence certain measures in the blood, in the body. And we can measure these, whatever markers you can use, for other types of doping. There's different ones, it doesn't matter. You can measure these in a reference group and look at their distribution. This is what it will look like. And obviously doping will somehow impair these markers and change these markers. And if you only look at doped athletes, they will be distributed differently. Here the marker is something called the abnormal blood profile score, but it's not important what it is. You can see, so there's kind of a shift between the doped group and the reference group. Now, if you have your handball group and you measure exactly the same thing, for example here, this will be your tested group, then you can see they are different from the dope group, but they're also a little bit different from the reference group, and by measuring the distance and the area between these curves, you can actually come and calculate the prevalence. So these are two means to calculate the prevalence to get an idea whether doping really matters in a sport and what type of doping. This is only being started now for different types of disciplines in the Olympic Games and various sports. Now, coming from the other side, coming from the stimulant side, from the substance side, and looking for an adequate testing strategy, the stimulants are pretty straightforward. Those are the oldest doping substances that exist. They've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So already in the 1800s, they were used for horse racing. They gave the horses these things for the horses to run faster. And they're usually easily detectable. Dr. Mohammed will be my witness with conventional analytical methods if the athletes are actually tested. And that's the main thing, So in competition, testing is key. And just a quick reminder, 2013 Handball World Championships, that was not long ago, 96 samples were taken in 84 matches. So let's face it, somebody from IHF in the room, Dr. Benito is the only one, that's not a lot of tests, and not testing is the best way to avoid positive tests. In most other ball sports, for example, football, you test usually 2 players per game at least, per team per game. So there's margin for improvement just for this. Anabolic steroids, also quite easy. All substances as well, they're also detectable with conventional methods. So just as the stimulants, the stuff that we have in our quiver, in our detection arsenal, actually is fine, to do the proper testing and to detect doping. But sometimes it's just not used because there's no proper testing program. Obviously, these steroids, as they are detectable for a long time, will be used before competition. And there are some rumors that teams have set out certain competition because they got handball competition because they didn't get the timing right, and they didn't field some players because they were scared they would test positive in the doping tests. So for these substances, and some out-of-competition testing is needed, and you can actually do it quite easily, if you test a week or 2 before competition, when the teams arrived already at the competition site. So these are quite 2 very simple possibilities to improve a testing strategy for handball, what they're doing at the moment. Now, there's also new developments, obviously. The athlete biological passport, Dr. Mohammed already mentioned it. This is a little bit the sexy tool that everybody wants to implement. So this is something new that many federations want because it makes them look good, and they seem to be at the forefront of the fight anti-doping. Now, for those who don't know, the athlete biological passport is a longitudinal monitoring of certain markers, biological markers, and through changes in these markers, doping can then be detected, right? Now, there's different types of modules for this, for the detection of different types of doping. There's the so-called hematological module, which is there for the detection of blood doping, most important for cycling, track and field, and all these things. So EPO blood transfusions can be detected with this thing. There's a steroidal module that is used for the detection of anabolic steroids. And there's an endocrinological module that is in development for the detection of growth hormone. Now, obviously, in handball, the hematological model doesn't make sense, because obviously handball players run between 3 and 4 kilometers per game. 80% of the time, they're standing around doing nothing. So endurance is not really a performance limiting factor. So no need for the hematological module. We've seen that maybe the steroids would make sense, so the steroidal module could be used. So that would be a possibility. So, in summary, if I could recommend something to the IHF for testing in handball, for keeping the sport clean, test the athletes. I think there's not enough tests in handball, and the low number of positives confirm this. Implement a targeted out-of-competition and in-competition testing program. We'll test the right athletes at the right time, and maybe consider the athlete biological passport, not for everybody, but for your top teams. This would make sense in anti-doping. Now, one thing that is close to anti-doping, which relates a bit to health, and this is going to be the last part, handball is a contact sport. Doping are usually medication, but there's also this gray zone of medication that will maybe help your performance by easing a little bit the pain that you sustained during previous games, the bruises that you have. These are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And with data from football that about 30% of players in the World Cups in football actually abuse these substances. And football is not really a contact sport, let's face it, compared to handball. So I suspect that these numbers possibly significantly higher in handball. We don't know. We don't know. And as you know, obviously the side effects of these substances can be severe. I know of one case of a handball player who had to undergo kidney transplantation because of the abuse of these substances over many years during games. All right, so in summary of my little talk about doping in handball, do we have a problem in handball? Probably not. I would agree with you that the prevalence is probably low due to the complex nature of the game, but we have no prevalence data. The main problem are recreational drugs, and we're going to hear about it in a second. Possibly drugs that we should look for in future tests are stimulants and anabolic substances. The recommended strategy to combat doping in handball involves a prevalence determination, targeted out of competition and in competition testing, and maybe the passport for the elite athletes. And maybe you should have a little look into NSAIDs to protect your athletes' health. Thank you very much. Any questions? After, okay, fine. Any questions? Everybody's scared, so one question.
Hi, thank you so much for that. You're clearly very experienced and a wealth of knowledge. I come from New Zealand and I contract to Drug Free Sport New Zealand. And handball is still a very small sport there, but we're very close to Australia. And there was a massive controversy really with the Australian sport in the last 12 months where there was a really big link between criminal activity and supply of human growth hormone and such like. What is your feedback, I guess, in the trends that you see where athletes are potentially getting these substances from? I know it's not directly related to what you presented, but I think it's perhaps relevant.
Yeah, it's very relevant. Thank you for bringing up the topic. We know from custom seizures, I think it's called seizures, right? When the custom, they take out parcels, that the amount of anabolic steroids is more than the amount of heroin and cocaine together. So it's a huge problem. And given the globalization through the internet, through online marketing and things like that, people all over the world can order anything. And obviously the anabolic steroids and related substances are very easy to make in a small underground lab. And there's a big margin, in possible gains. The risk of let's say the criminal consequences in making anabolic steroids are not as heavy as making heroin and cocaine. So this is a very attractive market for underground laboratories, and this is why it's on the rise, not only in high performance sports, but also in like grassroots level sport, all the fitness industry, lifestyle industry. So it's definitely a problem that will also, this is shown through the custom seizures that we have. Does that answer your question? No problem. Yeah, sure.
My other question is really related to supplements. In New Zealand, more than a third of all positive results in recent times has been supplements. And do you see any chance of supplements becoming regulated the way prescription medicine is? It seems to be such a massive market and so much money is being made from it. Is there any sign that there might be a change in regulation of supplements?
No, I don't think so, because obviously the supplements, there's two different regulations. They are basically food, and they're not medication. I think this is where the difference lies. I think there's a trend towards auto-regulation, so there's certain manufacturers who guarantee clean supplements, who go for regular batch testing in the laboratories, and who actually advertise this, and this might give them a competitive advantage at the end, so that hopefully maybe this is in the future, this is the tainted supplements are hopefully gonna die out and not be a danger for those who actually watch out. Obviously, the other ones who maybe want a little bit of a tainted supplement, there's always going to be there. But I think in the long term, the athlete who wants to stay clean, he can stay clean, even if he thinks he needs supplements. But I don't think there will be any regulation, because obviously there's two different areas: nutrition and medication. And nobody of the supplement manufacturers would like to go through one of the processes that is necessary to have a medication approved, which is long and costly, and they cannot afford this. Any other questions? Ask them.
I know that a lot of things are available on the internet. They teach you how to dope, and they teach you how to serially monitor. And is there anything that anyone can do about the the testing that is done illegally for the people who dope, so that they can be found clean before a competition?
No, obviously not. Unfortunately not. It's a good topic they're bringing up. This masking, doping, and masking strategy is becoming a major issue in elite sports, because people know now that the testers are actually quite good, and they spend some of their resources in trying to avoid the testers, not only to get the latest drug, but also to avoid them, So unfortunately, at the moment, no. There's a whole industry, and there's also renowned scientists in that area, who help the athletes avoiding these tests. It's particularly relevant to the biological passport, where it's more about the variations, and they get information from quite senior people how to keep your variation within an area where it's not suspicious. It's a big problem at the moment. We don't have any obvious solution for this one yet.